Okay, I know you don't know me well, but I'm going to take you on a little trip. So we're going to get behind the wheel and let's all get buckled. I've got the kids buckled in the back, so it's a nice day for a drive and off we go. Speed limit's 65, but I'm not that old, so we'll be doing about 75 miles an hour down the road. And we're headed down, and it's a nice trip, and all of a sudden, of course, it's Indiana. We see the red barrels. They're everywhere. So I think, maybe we should slow down. So tap on the brakes, and nothing. Tap on the brakes a little harder, and nothing. And all the way to the floor, and nothing. No brakes. Up ahead, you see a road crew. There are 3 of them there, but they have on ear protectors and the heavy machinery, and they're not going to hear you when you honk. You think, what am I going to do? If I run into them, I'll probably kill all 3 of them. You look to the side and you see an opening in the concrete barriers. I can take that. No, there's a little girl walking her dog at a rest stop. If you make that sudden turn, you'll take that child out too. What are we going to do? Do we opt to save the 1 instead of the 3, or the 3 instead of the 1? I'm not sure. Then you think, they're grown men. Maybe we'll take them out. But suppose one of them is headed back to medical school next month where he's going to be a pediatric oncologist. What could be more important? What if one of those men has new twins at home? What if one of those guys is the sole support of his aging mother and a disabled sibling? So then you look at the child. Suppose the child has autism, is nonverbal, and has a heart disease, and has no chance for much life or a very good life anyway. Do you go ahead and hit the child? No, it's a child. That doesn't seem right. So you think, okay, it's up to me. I'm going to make the sacrifice. I'm just going to crash into these barriers, and I'll be a mangled mess, but it's the right thing to do. But then you remember that your grandkids are buckled in the back seat. Does that make a difference? Well, of course it does. It really stinks, doesn't it? No decision is right. Nothing is easy. Nothing about this is fair. Anybody here have the perfect answer? Because I sure don't. Now, I wish all of you had the opportunity to preach now and then, not because it's fun, because this is not fun for me, but because it is a great opportunity to do some research and some soul searching. And I will say that I have done some soul searching. Now, certainly I have had moments where I have felt that I personally had not been treated fairly. And I can assure you, working for a church does not make that not a problem. And I'm sure people all around me have had feelings where they have not been treated fairly. I have been thinking about my own dear sister. She was the best. She was the best mother and grandmother and sister and aunt, the best person you could know. She spent her whole life taking care of other people. And just when it looked like she might have a little time to herself to do what she wanted to do, we could see the Alzheimer's hitting her hard. Then, to heap the coals on this horrible situation, came along COVID. And I had promised that I would be with her every step of her final journey. COVID came, and I could not keep my promise. And nothing will ever convince me that that was fair. But there are so many stories like mine. I think about the first responder at the Surfside condominiums in Florida. He was there trying to rescue victims and ended up finding his own dear child and covering her with his coat. Is that fair? Nope, it is not. I think kids especially demand fairness. They make a big deal about it, and I'm sure I'm not the only mom here who counted jelly beans for the Easter baskets to make sure they had the same number of jelly beans. My older daughter thought it was terribly unfair that we brought home a sibling without getting her permission. And as proof of the unfairness, she once said to me, "You look at her more than you look at me." Wow, kids are tough. Yes, they want fairness. So what do we say to our kids when they say, "That's not fair"? Well, I don't know about you, but the general response from me was, "Well, life isn't fair." But then you ask yourself, is that really our theology? If we say that God loves us, and he loves us equally, and he only wants the best for us, then why isn't life fair for everyone? Why would one child get 30 presents at Christmas and another only get one? You know, and it's harder, we think about it, it's important for us to decide what we need. And as we look around, we are more aware now of unfairness around us. We see it around the world. We see it instantly. We see it around the block. We know when there is unfairness. So I think it's important for us to decide what it is that we believe. Now, I know smarter minds than mine have tackled this subject, but here is my attempt. First of all, I think that when life isn't fair, it isn't fair to offer platitudes. I worked with a woman once whose job was being eliminated. It was a small agency, and they ran into some financial difficulty, and they were a little top-heavy on management, but they let go the lowest paid worker who actually had a job, and a job none of the rest of us could step into. It didn't make any sense. When she talked to the executive director about it, who was letting her go, the director said to her, "Well, when God closes a door, he opens a window." I'm sure that was intended to make her feel better, but it didn't. She didn't want a window. She wanted a job. She wanted fairness. She wanted to know, why the plan was made the way it was. The director probably thought she sounded like a very wise woman, but she was not helpful at all. There is also a poem that's often recited at funerals that says, "God broke our hearts to prove he only takes the best." And I'm sorry, I just think that is a pile of poop. I think that is the most ridiculous sentiment that we could give. For one thing, we all go. Whether we're the best or the worst, we're going to go. It makes no sense to me. And I believe that God surrounds us with his love. I believe that he receives our loved ones. But he doesn't take them. Cancer takes them. Automobile accidents take them. Faulty brakes may take them. The pollutants we put in the air may take our loved ones. Drug overdoses take our loved ones. God does not take them, he receives them. I just really don't like that poem. I have a friend who was at the funeral for her 16-year-old son. He was killed in a farming accident. The tractor overturned. His brother was driving. It was horrible. She was at her son's funeral, and a woman who apparently liked platitudes came up to her and said, "I know how you feel. I lost my grandmother." Really? Your grandmother? Her son? You don't have a clue how she felt. Why would you say that? An unhelpful platitude if ever there was one. Or how about God doesn't give us more than we can handle? Once again, I don't think that makes sense. It is not helpful and it's not biblical. There is a verse in Corinthians that says God won't tempt us more than we can withstand. But I don't think there's any place in the Bible that it says God gives us more than we can handle. And he may give us the temptation, which in some degree we can control, but not unfairness, not tragedy, not grief. I think it is one of life's great mysteries that people handle adversity in such different ways. One person may lose a child and ask, "Why me?" for years and years and years, and grieve with an unending grief. Another may lose a child and certainly grieve, but say, why not me? Why not me? One person may come home from work and kick the dog and scream at the kids and bark at his wife because his boss sent back a report to be redone, while another person may endure weeks and months of chemo and radiation and be gentle and grateful and calm throughout the whole ordeal. My guess here is that it is not the person's faith in God that makes the difference, but the person's awareness of the presence of God that is with us at all times. Second, I believe that when we set ourselves up for disappointments. Dr. Stephen Carlson and his daughter Susan wrote a book called When Life Isn't Fair. And in the book, Dr. Carlson was struggling to understand why his beautiful, young, bright daughter had leukemia. Why Susan? She's always been such a blessing. But then he tells this story about a man who had an experiment. And he walked up and down the street, he picked up a block, walked up and down the street on day one, handing out $100 bills. Well, people were pretty excited about that. So he came the next day, walked up and down the street, handing out $100 bills. They kind of thought maybe it was a gimmick, but they were still all for it. They still took their $100 bills. And each day, the excitement built. Partway through, people started coming from other streets to watch what was going on. And every day, he walked up and down the street, handing out $100 bills. On day 31, he walked up and down the street empty-handed. People shouted at him. They screamed. They raised their fists. Come back here with my money. I want my money. Come back here. So we know that what had started out as an unexpected blessing had become an ordinary expectation. We seem to think sometimes that blessings are our due and they are fair, and adversity is unfair. Yet life has always been a mixed bag. Even our beloved 23rd Psalm says that some days your cup runneth over and some days you walk in the darkness. Third, I believe our God has broad shoulders and he can take our anger and our frustration and our questions. Job was clearly angry with God at all of his hardships. He reminds God that he has always been upright. He has aided the poor and the widow, and he believes it is his right to have good things come his way. He tells God that if he can show any time that he failed to help an orphan, that his arm should be ripped from its socket. It helps to get things off our chest. A friend and I were recently discussing how sometimes as parents we don't let our children be heard. Now, I'm not suggesting we let them be rude, but sometimes they need to be heard. And Patty mentioned to me a conversation she had in our child care center. Central has a rather large child care center. And she was up there with Miss Carla one day, and one of the kids came up to her crying and tried to interrupt. And, she told him gently that she was talking to an adult, and he continued. And she said, "Are you hurt?" No, he wasn't hurt. He just wanted to tell on his friends. And so she said, "If you are just here to tattle, go tell it to the pig." The pig was a stuffed animal that sat in his own little chair in the corner of the room, and he was there to hear the complaints. So he wanted Miss Carla, but he went over to the pig, and he said, "And Billy pushed down my tower, and Becky wouldn't let me play with her, and they took the toy I wanted, and the teacher's not reading the book, and blah." And he whined and cried and carried on until he had been heard, and then he left the pig, he went back to his playgroup, and he was fine. He needed to be heard. I was reading from a little book recently that gave us some historical explanations for unfairness. For instance, bad things happen to good people because God is testing us. Bad things happen to good people because of other people's sinfulness. Bad things happen to good people because of the sins of our ancestors. We're all in trouble then. Bad things happen because God is teaching us or punishing us for a sin that we aren't even aware of. I'm not impressed with any of those explanations. I think life isn't fair because sometimes life just isn't fair. And we can complain. We can tell it to the pig because we need to be heard. Life isn't fair. But when life isn't fair and we need to be heard, we must also remember that sometimes we need to listen. This will help us to ensure that fairness is not confused with justice. Justice is different. We might need to accept unfairness, but we need to fight for justice. It might be nice to focus on being heard, but this is 2021. We've been through too much, we know too much, and now we have to listen. I think that if we focus on what is unfair, we will often find ourselves engaging in pointless self-pity. But to focus on justice is to do the work of Christ. The parable of the day laborers seems to be a perfect illustration of unfairness. Laborers are hired early in the morning, and their wages are agreed to. Then a few hours later, more come along, and a few hours later, more come along, and a few hours later, more come along. It would seem fair that those who worked the longest would be paid the most. And yet the last group labors only for a short while, and they are paid the same. Now, as with most scriptures, I guess there are lots of interpretations, and some might simply say that it means the boss can just pay whatever he wants. But this explanation is neither fair nor just. In fact, it is downright painful for people of color and for women who have been victimized by these kinds of labor practices. Rather, I think Jesus was telling us that it is time to level the playing field. In Proverbs 11, we are told that God wants honesty and justice, and a false balance is an abomination. It will be justice, I believe, when school children are taught that Christopher Columbus was no hero. It will be justice when we admit that we tried to destroy the culture of the Native Americans. It will be justice when white children are taught about the Tulsa riots. My 21-year-old granddaughter, who is at IU, and I were talking recently, and she had never heard of Jim Crow. It's not justice that we have wiped that clean. It will be justice when children are taught as much about Harriet Tubman as Helen Keller. It will be justice when the parents of the Sandy Hook children finally see some common sense gun laws. It will be justice when we put an end to for-profit prisons and juvenile detention centers. It will be justice when we reform our criminal justice system. As an example, Nicholas Thrash, a black man, was found guilty of impregnating a 10-year-old. He was sentenced to 130 years in jail, and he complained that that was not fair. Now, I don't have a problem with it. I can't imagine most people in here would have a problem with it, but he thought it wasn't fair. It seems perfectly fair to me until you consider that Robert Richards IV, an heir to the DuPont fortune and a white man, was given no jail time for raping his 3-year-old daughter. The judge thought he wouldn't fare well in jail. The waters of fair and just have always been muddy. There's an old story about a man who is sick and they can't figure it out, and he goes to the hospital and they do a number of tests on him. And finally the doctor comes in and he said, "Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you have rabies, and it's too late now for treatment. There's nothing we can do." So the man said, "Well, can I have a pencil and paper?" And the doctor said, "Oh, I guess you're going to write your last will and testament." And the man said, "No, I'm going to make a list of people I want to bite." You know, there are days that I have a list of people I want to bite. There are days when I think it would feel good to get even. It might feel good to all of us sometimes to get even. And it might feel fair. But we are followers of Christ, and we don't get to get even or wallow in self-pity. We do get to turn to God, and we get to be heard. We get to be grateful that He will be with us in times of trouble. But when there are issues of justice, make no mistake, God will turn to us.